Have you ever woken up in the morning and asked yourself, who am I really? Not what people expect you to be, but who you truly are when nobody's watching. It's a scary question because many of us spend our entire lives avoiding the answer. Modern society has created a dangerous illusion. We believe we're mature adults just because we have jobs, families, and responsibilities. But there's a huge difference between performing social roles and having a true identity. This journey will reveal how we can live for decades playing characters we didn't choose and why it's so hard to discover what we really want from life. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about maturity and authenticity. Imagine a 40-year-old man, married, father of 2 children, with a stable job and a house in the suburbs. To any outside observer, he's the perfect definition of a successful adult. But something strange happens when we look closer. This man still acts like a child seeking constant approval. He doesn't make decisions based on what he believes is right, but on what's expected of him. James Hollis, renowned American Jungian psychotherapist, born in Springfield, Illinois, is one of the greatest references in contemporary depth psychology. In his works, Hollis warns about a common phenomenon in our society: prolonged childhood. For him, millions of people go through life without developing a true identity because they simply let social roles define who they are. They become the exemplary husband, the dedicated father, the reliable employee, and these masks end up being their only source of value and identity. Hollis explains that by not knowing what we really want from life, we project our deepest needs onto these roles, hoping they'll bring us the meaning and happiness we can't find on our own. So we end up living a life that isn't truly ours, just meeting the world's expectations around us. This situation arises from a fundamental problem. We don't know what we want from life. When a person doesn't have clarity about their genuine desires, they naturally cling to the roles that society offers as ready-made packages of identity. It's like choosing clothes in a store. It seems practical, but it might not fit your specific body. The most dangerous part is how we project childish needs onto adult relationships. We seek in marriage the same comfort a child finds in their mother's lap. We expect work to give us the same approval a proud father offers his child. When these projections fail, our entire identity collapses like a house of cards. This emotional dependence creates an invisible trap. The person feels safe within established roles, but this safety is an illusion. They're building their life on foundations that belong to others, not to themselves. Society sells a seductive lie. Fulfilling social roles automatically transforms us into fulfilled adults. We marry believing this will solve our loneliness. We work thinking professional success will define our worth. We have children imagining parenthood will complete us as people. Leo Tolstoy brilliantly captured this tragedy in his work, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. The protagonist followed the perfect social script, graduated in law, married appropriately, built a respectable career. But when he's dying, he makes a terrifying discovery. He had never lived a life that was truly his own. Ivan Ilyich represents the condition of millions of people who wake up every day and execute a script they didn't write. They follow external expectations like actors in a play they never chose to perform. The audience's applause masks the growing emptiness inside. This trap is especially cruel because it offers immediate rewards. Society celebrates those who follow established rules. Family, friends, and colleagues praise responsible and mature behavior. But this recognition hides a painful truth. The person might be living a borrowed life. The question that should echo in our minds daily is, who am I when I'm not playing any role? This simple question can cause panic because it exposes the frightening possibility that maybe we don't know the answer. And it's exactly this fear that keeps us trapped in safe but limiting roles. Throughout history, certain people have had extraordinary courage to question established roles. Artists, saints, and poets weren't rebels without a cause. They realized something was fundamentally wrong with how society defined what it means to be human. Rollo May and Søren Kierkegaard dedicated their lives to understanding a disturbing paradox. Why do people in prosperous societies feel so empty inside? They discovered that material progress doesn't guarantee psychological well-being. On the contrary, The more organized societies become, the more individuals lose touch with their essences. Kierkegaard had a brilliant insight about modernity. He observed that people became lonely crowds, surrounded by others, but deeply disconnected from themselves. The pressure to conform was so intense that genuine individuality became almost impossible to achieve. The existential crisis arises precisely when these social projections begin to crumble. A man dedicates 30 years to a company, defining himself by his position. One day he's fired and doesn't know who he is anymore. A woman sees herself only as a wife and mother. When the children leave home, she faces a terrifying emptiness. These moments of collapse, though painful, are precious opportunities in disguise. They force us to confront questions we'd avoided for decades, but not everyone has the courage to take advantage of these chances for rebirth. Many prefer to quickly seek new roles, repeating the same self-destructive pattern. Franz Kafka created the best metaphor about modern alienation that ever existed. In his work, The Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa wakes up, transformed into a giant insect. But the most disturbing aspect isn't the physical transformation, it's Gregor's reaction. His first concern isn't with his new monstrous condition, but with being late for work. This opening reveals something devastating about how we live. Gregor was so disconnected from himself that not even a literal metamorphosis could make him question his priorities. He continued defining himself exclusively by his social function, being the family provider. His identity was welded to his professional role. The transformation works as a magnifying glass that amplifies the fragility of identities based only on social utility. When a person defines themselves by what they do, not by who they are, their identity becomes extremely vulnerable. Any external change can cause complete psychological collapse. Kafka shows us how dependence on social approval can be fatal. Gregor had built all his self-esteem on validation from family and employer. When this approval evaporated due to the transformation, he became completely lost in his own body and mind. Gregor's despair intensifies due to the impossibility of communicating his inner experience. Even transformed, he maintains his human consciousness, but can't express thoughts and feelings. This incommunicability represents the existential loneliness that many people experience, even surrounded by apparently intimate relationships. Carl Jung developed the revolutionary concept of persona, the social mask we all wear to function in society. The persona is necessary and useful, allowing us to play different roles in various contexts. The problem arises when the person completely merges with this mask, forgetting that an authentic being exists behind it. Gregor Samsa was a man totally identified with his persona as a responsible provider. He hadn't developed other dimensions of his personality beyond this specific role. When the transformation prevented him from continuing to work, his entire identity imploded. He discovered in the cruelest way that he was much more than his social function, but didn't know what this more was. Gregor's family initially tried to maintain some emotional connection, but as time passed, it became evident that his value was directly linked to his ability to support them financially. Without economic utility, he also lost the love and respect of relatives. This brutal dynamic reveals how many relationships are functional contracts disguised as emotional bonds. Gregor's permanent anxiety about disappointing his boss mirrors a frightening contemporary reality. Millions of people live in constant fear of not meeting professional expectations, even when these expectations are inhumane. They internalize external demands in such a way that they lose the ability to question whether these demands make any sense. This alienation manifests in Gregor's obsessive concern with practical details, even in his impossible condition. He keeps thinking about schedules, responsibilities, and obligations, as if he could restore normality through willpower. This denial of reality shows how difficult it is to abandon mental patterns that have defined us for decades. Søren Kierkegaard defined despair as the sickness unto death, a condition where the individual, consciously or unconsciously, rejects themselves. This definition fits perfectly with Gregor Samsa's trajectory. who exemplifies the three types of despair identified by the Danish philosopher. The first type is unconscious despair, where the person lives completely unaware of their own alienation. Gregor spent years in this condition, existing only to fulfill the social projection of dedicated provider. He never questioned whether he really wanted that life or if other possibilities existed. He simply accepted the assigned role and executed it automatically, like a programmed robot. After the transformation, Gregor experienced the second type, conscious despair. He began to perceive that his previous life had been an emotional prison, but didn't know how to redefine himself. He tried to find new ways to relate to his family and himself, but his attempts were frustrated by others' rejection and his own existential confusion. The third type, demonic despair, manifests in Gregor's family. The father develops progressively destructive anger directed at his transformed son. This hostility stems from fear and inability to process a reality that challenges his fundamental expectations. Instead of trying to understand, he chooses aggression as a defense mechanism. The progression of these types of despair reveals how alienation can evolve from a passive condition to an actively destructive force. When people can't integrate fundamental changes in their lives, they may develop increasingly extreme and harmful responses for everyone around them. The gradual rejection of Gregor by his family culminates in episodes of physical violence, deep emotional deterioration, and finally, his death in complete solitude. The process is devastating because it exposes how so-called family love can transform into hatred when utility conditions are no longer satisfied. Gregor's father exemplifies a sadly common reaction to the unknown, converting fear into aggression. Unable to emotionally process his son's transformation, he develops growing hostility that explodes in physical attacks. This response reveals how many people deal with situations that challenge their limited understanding of the world. The mother represents another type of emotional powerlessness. She feels genuine compassion, but doesn't have the courage to act according to her feelings. She's paralyzed between love for her son and social pressure to reject him. Her inability to take a clear position ends up being as harmful as her husband's declared hostility. Greta, the sister, initially demonstrates impressive care and dedication, but gradually becomes exhausted with constant responsibility. Her transformation from compassionate caregiver to advocate for her brother's elimination represents how even the closest relationships can deteriorate when tested by circumstances that require unconditional love. Gregor's departure happens in absolute isolation, physical, emotional, and existential. He dies abandoned by everyone who once claimed to love him, and his death is received by the family not as a loss, but as relief. The ending of the metamorphosis is relentless in its brutal honesty. There's no mourning, reflection, or longing, just a sense of liberation that allows the family to move on with their lives. This reaction reveals the extent of dehumanization that settled throughout the narrative, symbolizing society's systematic indifference toward those who can't fulfill socially productive roles. Immediately, the family completely reorganizes their future plans. They move to a smaller house, more suited to their new financial circumstances. More significantly, they begin to see Greta as a new source of hope and family pride. She's young, attractive, and has potential for an advantageous marriage. In other words, she can fulfill economically valuable social roles. This quick transition from mourning to pragmatic planning reveals the cruel workings of our society. People have value while they contribute in recognizable ways to collective well-being. When they stop being useful, they can be discarded without guilt or remorse. Gregor, who supported the family for years, is erased from memory almost instantly. Kafka forces us to confront questions we'd prefer to avoid forever. What happens to our humanity when we reduce people to functions? How do we build true relationships in a society obsessed with productivity? Is it possible to love someone unconditionally, or does our love always depend on paybacks? The book doesn't offer consoling answers or easy solutions. It functions as a relentless mirror that reflects dark aspects of the human condition we'd prefer not to recognize. This ability to confront us with uncomfortable truths is what makes the metamorphosis a timeless and universally relevant work. James Hollis reminds us that one of the most complex tasks of adult life is separating our inner truth from the noise created by social expectations. We live bombarded by messages about what we should want: professional success, perfect relationships, financial security, public recognition. But we rarely stop to question whether these goals make sense for our specific lives. The difficulty of knowing what we want stems from early conditioning to seek external approval. We learn to measure our worth by what others think, not by what we think of ourselves. This dependence on others' validation creates a deep disconnection from our authentic desires and needs. The alienation that Kafka portrays can be, paradoxically, a precious opportunity for reconnection with our true selves. When social roles fail or become unsustainable, we're forced to confront fundamental questions about identity. These moments of crisis can be crucial turning points if we have the courage to fully embrace them. Hollis suggests a revolutionary approach: demand less from others and more from ourselves. Instead of expecting relationships, work, or material achievements to complete us, we need to develop an internal source of meaning and value. This doesn't mean becoming selfish, but taking responsibility for our own existential fulfillment. The path to avoiding existential despair passes through the courage to ask uncomfortable questions and the willingness to live with the uncertainties these questions generate. Who am I beyond the roles I play? What does my life truly require me to accomplish? How can I contribute authentically, not just functionally? All this reflection about social roles and authenticity leads us to a disturbing realization. We should be cautious with people who present themselves as excessively good. Why? Because goodness can also be just another well-rehearsed social role, a carefully constructed mask to hide other intentions. Performative goodness is a real and potentially manipulative phenomenon. Some people have discovered that acting pleasant and helpful brings them significant social advantages: approval, trust, opportunities for influence. This artificial goodness disappears quickly when there's no audience or when their true interests are at stake. Sophisticated manipulators frequently use a facade of exceptional goodness to disarm their victims. They meticulously study what you value and present themselves exactly that way, like experienced actors playing the role they know you want to see. It's the same dynamic we observe in Gregor's family: relationships based on utility disguised as affection. The danger arises when we label someone as a good person and stop critically observing their behavior over time. We create an idealized image that blinds us to important contradictions and warning signs. Just as Gregor was alienated from his own reality, we can become alienated from the reality of people around us. True relational wisdom lies in observing consistency between words and actions, paying special attention to how the person treats those who can offer nothing in return. Trust gradually, based on concrete evidence accumulated over time, not on seductive first impressions or labels we hastily assign. The journey between living for others and discovering our authenticity is one of the most challenging a human being can face. It requires courage to question comfortable certainties and willingness to face the anxiety that accompanies true freedom of choice. Developing healthy skepticism in our relationships is part of this authentic emotional maturity. This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or antisocial, but rather cultivating the ability to see people as they really are, not as we'd like them to be. True trust is built through consistent experiences, not through well-performed social roles or empty promises of performative goodness. But all this reflection would be just another intellectual exercise if it didn't lead us to an inevitable question. How do we start living more authentically? Because understanding the problem isn't enough. We need to act. The answer lies in small daily insurgencies against the scripts we inherited. Try this challenge. For 1 week, record all the moments when you notice yourself acting out of social obligation, not conviction. Are they the coffee breaks because colleagues do them? The automatic compliments on photos you didn't even look at properly? The opinions you swallow to avoid conflict? These micro gestures are the most invisible shackles, and the most liberating when broken. James Hollis proposes a powerful question to start the day. What choice would I make today if I really cared about myself? Maybe it's something small, saying no to an invitation that will drain you, calling that friend who makes sense, wearing the clothes you love, even if they don't match your age or role. Here's a concrete path that can help you. Find your productive discomfort. Growth begins where your social character ends. If you're the patient one, try saying no without justifying yourself. If you're the good student, allow yourself to deliver something imperfect. The tremor you feel is the signal that you're touching something real. Create disidentification rituals. Every Sunday, do something completely outside your usual roles. A forest bath without photos for Instagram. A dance class where you're the clumsy beginner. These spaces between identities are where the genuine self begins to breathe. Ask yourself, what don't I want to lose? When you need to make a difficult decision, stop and think. At the end of my life, what will I be proud of having done? What will I regret not having tried? Use this reflection as a guide. Sometimes, choosing the most comfortable path means giving up something that could give meaning to your life. Own your shadow side with responsibility. Jung reminds us, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. What emotions do you repress most? Anger, envy, fear. Write about them, even if it's just for you. They have much to teach. Exercise solitude as an antidote. Spend an afternoon without distractions, without goals, without masks. Solitude can be scary at first, but it's in this silence that your true voice begins to emerge. The metamorphosis doesn't have to be catastrophic like Gregor Samsa's. It can start simple. A smile you stop faking. A no said firmly. The price? Some disappointment from others. The reward? The strange and wonderful feeling of being whole inside your own skin.